The strategic landscape facing the Wehrmacht High Command in the summer of 1944 was defined by an acute, existential problem: scarcity. They were fighting a multi-front war with desperately limited resources: fuel, aircraft, armored reserves, and trained manpower. After the Allied success in Normandy, every German countermeasure was a high-stakes gamble. The success of their entire defense hinged on one, seemingly immutable factor: accurate intelligence. German generals needed to know precisely where the massive Allied forces were concentrated, and where they were merely conducting reconnaissance or feints. To commit an irreplaceable panzer division to the wrong sector was a strategic death sentence. The rigid hierarchical structure of German intelligence, the Abwehr and the Sicherheitsdienst SD, instilled a deep, almost arrogant faith in quantifiable data. Their core doctrine held that the sheer scale of a modern mechanized army, the tonnage, the personnel, the logistics, made it physically impossible to conceal. An Allied division comprising approximately 15,000 men and 4,000 vehicles would leave an undeniable and enduring signature. This signature included vast dust clouds visible from high altitude, distinctive electromagnetic radiation from communication centers, acoustic patterns from hundreds of engines, and the wear patterns left on road surfaces by heavy tank tracks. The German analysts, steeped in the meticulous, almost obsessive study of these physical facts, believed they held a monopoly on accurate material assessment. This intellectual hubris was reinforced by their success in the early years of the war. They had perfected the art of tracking troop movements across the vast plains of Russia and the intricate road networks of Europe. They trusted their Funkhorstellen listening posts, their aerial reconnaissance, the Aufklärungsstaffeln, and their spy networks. The underlying assumption, the fatal flaw, was that the enemy was predictable and bound by the same logistical and physical constraints as the Wehrmacht. They calculated based on the predictable physics of steel, oil, and manpower. They were utterly unprepared for the emergence of an enemy whose weapon was pure performance art. This unwavering belief in the visibility and physical permanence of material reality was the strategic vulnerability that the Allies sought to exploit. They understood that the German mind could process and analyze immense volumes of physical data, but it was completely unequipped to handle a challenge to the nature of that reality itself. The true genius of the upcoming Allied deception was not in concealing a real army, but in manufacturing a convincing phantom army whose existence contradicted every established tenet of German military intelligence doctrine. The battleground was about to shift from the muddy fields of France to the synapses of the German General Staff. The strategic failure of the German defense, therefore, began not with a massive Allied tank battle, but with the creation of a unit dedicated entirely to theatricality. This group, officially designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, would prove that the most effective combat unit could be one that killed no one, but whose operations were designed to induce a fatal paralysis of command across the entire German war machine. The illusion was about to become the single, most strategically disruptive force on the Western Front. The concept for the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army, was incubated not in a field tent, but in the secretive, intellectual circles of Allied strategic planning in London in late 1943. High-level planners, including those within the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, realized that traditional battlefield camouflage was insufficient against sophisticated German intelligence gathering. What was needed was an entirely new military doctrine based on strategic misdirection and psychological shock. The concept was championed by two officers, Colonel Billy Harris and Colonel H. Reeder, who proposed a fully self-contained unit capable of simulating two full-strength U.S. combat divisions, a force of roughly 30,000 men and 5,000 vehicles, using only a small, highly specialized team. This was the first military unit in history whose sole purpose was systematic, high-level tactical deception, TAD. Their objective was to use illusion to achieve the same strategic effects as a genuine armored column, freezing enemy reserves, diverting reconnaissance, and forcing the German command to invest resources against a non-existent threat. The unit's personnel selection reflected its revolutionary mission. Instead of relying on standard combat recruitment, the 23rd became an intellectual and creative haven. The Army sought out individuals with highly specialized civilian skills essential for creating and sustaining a convincing illusion. They recruited architects who understood scale and perspective, commercial artists and set designers who could craft visual realism, radio engineers who could mimic the electromagnetic signature of a massive division, and actors and writers who could create and perform a convincing human narrative. This extraordinary talent pool included future fashion designer Bill Blass, renowned abstract painter Ellsworth Kelly, and photographer Art Kane. These were the unexpected, creative resources of the arsenal of democracy, weaponized not with predictable steel, but with the unpredictable power of performance art and intellectual ingenuity. The unit's training, conducted in secrecy at various sites in England, resembled a theatrical workshop more than a military exercise. Recruits learned how to deploy inflatable decoys in convincing patterns, master the intricacies of acoustic projection, and most importantly, embody the precise persona of the soldiers in the real unit they were impersonating. They were taught that their success would be measured not by enemy body counts, but by the volume of false intelligence they forced the German high command to believe. The Ghost Army was a declaration that the nature of modern warfare had evolved. The enemy could be defeated by compelling them to believe a lie, thus ensuring that their finite resources were always committed to the wrong battle. The entire project was an elaborate, high-stakes piece of psychological engineering, designed to overload the German analytical system. The strategic effectiveness of the Ghost Army, and its power to unravel the German war machine, lay in its mastery of 4 integrated disciplines of tactical deception, TAD. German intelligence, while sophisticated, typically relied on cross-referencing only 2 or 3 disparate sources. The 23rd countered this by creating a synthetic reality that saturated all 4 primary German intelligence channels, making the illusion virtually irrefutable. This comprehensive, multi-layered approach was the secret weapon that guaranteed the deception's success against a thorough enemy. The first pillar was visual deception, which involved the use of inflatable rubber and canvas decoys to simulate a massive concentration of heavy armor and support vehicles. The art here was not merely in shape, but in manufacturing visual cues that convinced both the spy on the ground and the reconnaissance photo analyst high above. Decoys were meticulously painted, complete with subtle variations in texture and shadow, ensuring they registered as having real mass and depth in aerial photographs. The illusion was complete with tire tracks and fake camouflage netting to imply complexity and permanence, making the phantom force visually solid. The second pillar was aural deception, the technical discipline of manipulating sound to create the auditory illusion of a massive, moving force. Using specialized recording equipment and massive, custom-built speaker systems, the unit broadcast the authentic, low-frequency rumble of a mechanized division up to 15 miles away. This targeted the German Funkhorststellen, forcing them to report massive, genuine troop movements based solely on acoustic data, which was traditionally considered highly reliable and difficult to fake. The third pillar was radio deception, spoof radio. Radio operators, known as spoofers, mimicked the precise electromagnetic signature of the unit being impersonated. This required mastering the unique rhythm of the Morse code keying, the operator's fist, and transmitting fabricated messages detailing realistic, high-priority orders, e.g., fuel demands, troop counts, attack coordinates. This deception fed directly into the German signals intelligence, which used FIST, analysis as a primary means of unit identification, ensuring the illusion was electromagnetically live. The final pillar was personnel deception, the most human and psychologically impactful discipline. Soldiers acted as undercover agents, wearing the authentic insignia of the unit they were simulating. They deliberately engaged with local civilians and suspected German spies, spreading specific, false rumors about their real operational objectives. This provided German human intelligence with verified, insider information, reinforcing the lie with seemingly unimpeachable, ground-level confirmation. The comprehensive, integrated, multi-layered deception was designed to overwhelm the analyst's mind and force a conclusion of absolute certainty in a strategic fabrication. The most famous and visually absurd tool of the Ghost Army was the inflatable decoy. Yet these rubber props were anything but simple. They were the product of careful, industrial design and detailed artistic application. The effectiveness of the rubber tank lay in its ability to convincingly represent mass, while possessing none of the logistical burden of a real tank. It was a perfect piece of wartime theater designed to cheat the enemy's logistics and intelligence systems simultaneously. The M4 Sherman tank decoy, the most common type used, was manufactured from lightweight, airtight rubber and supported by reinforced baffles and ribs. The entire structure weighed only 100 pounds, a negligible fraction of the Sherman's 30-ton weight. This allowed a team of 4 men, using a standard field air pump, to inflate a tank in under 15 minutes. Crucially, the decoys were designed to mimic not just the shape of the tank, but the subtle variations in its silhouette when viewed from extreme altitude, ensuring the illusion held under intense optical scrutiny that German reconnaissance relied upon. The decoys arrived at the front lines in small trucks and jeeps, a logistical cheat that allowed the 23rd to transport the equivalent of an entire armored division's worth of tanks using fewer than 20 vehicles. The unit could effectively deploy 400 tanks in a single night. This rapid deployment capability meant the phantom force could appear and disappear with impossible speed, a central component of the deception. The true art lay in making the decoys appear to be genuine heavy steel. The artists and architects perfected the illusion. The track signature was created when jeeps and trucks, attached with large, heavy steel rollers, track rollers, drove wide, circular patterns around the decoys, pressing deep, convincing tank tracks into the soft ground. This signature of heavy armor moving off-road was a crucial piece of visual intelligence that German pilots and ground spies were trained to look for, validating the existence of a real force. Furthermore, the detail of imperfection was painstakingly applied. Artists meticulously applied paint, mud, and dust to the rubber surface. They avoided making the decoys look new or perfect, deliberately adding small visual cues of wear and tear, faded unit numbers, patched camouflage to align with the reality of frontline armor. This subtlety was essential, as German intelligence often used the quality of a unit's equipment as a proxy for its deployment history, and the subtle imperfections sold the lie. Finally, the placement for perspective was a calculated exercise. Decoys were never placed in dense, irregular clusters. They were positioned with precise military spacing and organization, using the principles of perspective to ensure that even a small grouping of rubber tanks, carefully arranged in an open clearing, implied a much larger, hidden force extending deep into the woods. The German pilot flying overhead saw a massive, organized tank park, ready for deployment, not a handful of inflatable props. The rubber tank was more than a prop. It was a highly effective piece of cost-effective psychological artillery. The initial, tactical deployments of the Ghost Army served as the training ground for the massive deceptions to come, confirming the unit's efficacy in the high-stakes environment of the European theater. Their first significant operation, Operation A, was executed in the aftermath of the Allied breakout from the Normandy hedgerows, where every German movement was a desperate gamble against annihilation. This first test proved the feasibility of fooling the formidable German intelligence apparatus. The Allies desperately needed to create the illusion that the U.S. 6th Armored Division was holding a key sector near Brest, while the real 6th was rapidly repositioning for a major thrust towards the German border. This required convincing German intelligence that a full-strength armored division had not only remained in place, but was preparing for a defensive stand, tying up German reserves that could have reinforced the crumbling front. The task of manufacturing this defensive posture, with all its visual, acoustic, and electromagnetic signatures, fell entirely to the 23rd. The Ghost Army seamlessly moved into the area the real division had just vacated. They meticulously deployed their inflatable armor, set up a command center that mirrored the exact configuration of the 6th Armored's real headquarters, and began their sonic and radio symphony. Crucially, they positioned their sound equipment and radio transmitters at the exact locations where the real division's signal company and motor pool would have been, ensuring spatial consistency for German tracking. Major Müller's intelligence unit quickly registered the anomalies. Aerial reconnaissance reported the presence of the 6th Armored's familiar tanks, a visual confirmation that was irrefutable from the air. Simultaneously, German signals intelligence reported a massive spike in coded radio traffic originating from the sector, with operators exhibiting the fists unique to the 6th Armored signal crew. The local spy networks reported seeing the division's distinctive bumper codes on jeeps in nearby towns, coupled with rumors of supply officers stocking up for a prolonged defense, completing the circle of confirmation. The combined evidence was irrefutable to the German analysts. They concluded with high confidence that the U.S. 6th Armored Division was still firmly entrenched and posed a significant threat that required immediate attention. They shifted precious reconnaissance resources, artillery observation, and even a minor counterattack force to the sector, all directed at the Ghost Army's illusion. The real 6th Armored Division, meanwhile, conducted its critical repositioning unmolested, achieving operational surprise and ensuring its forces were ready for the actual breakthrough, all thanks to the deception. The success of Operation A confirmed the validity of the TAD doctrine. German intelligence could be overwhelmingly fooled, but only if the lie was simultaneously validated across all 4 critical intelligence channels. The Germans were defeated by their own thoroughness, as every sensor they relied upon simply validated the strategic lie. The German signals intelligence, SIGINT, was the backbone of their reconnaissance, and the Ghost Army's ability to flawlessly mimic this medium, the spoof radio discipline, was crucial to their strategic success. German analysts spent hours tracking the electromagnetic signature of the enemy, confident that the rhythmic tapping of a Morse keyer provided the highest level of assurance. This was the most technically challenging and most strategically effective layer of the deception, as it fed directly into the enemy's most trusted intelligence channel. The fundamental principle exploited by the spoofers was the fist, the unique, often subconscious rhythm and cadence with which a radio operator keyed his Morse code. German analysts, spending hours listening to radio traffic, could reliably identify an operator and, by extension, his unit based on this signature. The 23rd needed to create the electromagnetic illusion of a division's entire signal corps, a task requiring dozens of operators all mimicking the style of the original unit. The spoofers, often former civilian radio engineers, mastered the art of imitation. They studied the recorded fists of the real units they were impersonating, practicing until they could flawlessly replicate the rhythm, speed, and even the subtle technical errors of the original operator. This technique gave the simulated radio traffic a soul, convincing the German ear that the message was genuine. Right down to the hesitation of a tired operator, or the hurried tapping of a message during a simulated crisis. The sheer volume and narrative of the radio traffic were equally important. The Ghost Army transmitted messages that were realistic and high volume, occurring at the precise times and frequencies of the real unit, discussing mundane logistical details, requests for specific fuel types, confirmations of supply deliveries, and officer transfers. This high volume of realistic, mundane traffic drowned out the subtle, concealed signals of the real unit, effectively creating an electromagnetic smokescreen. Furthermore, they included strategically misleading content. Within the flow of mundane traffic, the spoofers would transmit occasional key messages that were strategically false. Confirm new attack coordinates for 600 tomorrow, or require 5,000 gallons of high octane for armored advance. These key messages, when combined with the visual decoy of the rubber tanks, locked the Germans into a false defensive posture. The psychological impact of this spoof radio was immense. It forced the German high command to believe that the enemy division was not only physically present, due to the visual and acoustic lies, but was also actively planning and communicating, due to the electromagnetic lie. The German analysts were ultimately betrayed by the very sophistication of their own SIGINT apparatus, as the complexity of the intelligence they received merely confirmed the strategic lie. The technical mastery of the fist was the single greatest betrayal of German confidence. The constant barrage of high-quality, synthetic intelligence reports began to create a state of cognitive dissonance within the German analysis centers at OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. Major Müller and his colleagues, who prided themselves on their meticulous cross-referencing, were constantly confronted with data that was internally consistent but strategically absurd. This internal conflict paralyzed their ability to make rational command decisions, leading to fatal delays and misallocations. The reports would confirm: visual, 50-plus tanks confirmed near Viersen; oral, heavy armor movement confirmed on all listening posts; radio, high-volume traffic planning a crossing. Yet the strategic analysis would balk. Why would the enemy mass so heavily in this tactically disadvantageous area? Why is the nearby real unit so quiet? Why are the supply demands so exaggerated? The data screamed attack here, but the map screamed attack over there. The German mind, trained for efficiency, could not process the notion of a military unit designed for wastefulness and misdirection. They continuously sought a conventional, strategic explanation for the anomalies, leading them to assume deep camouflage, theorizing the silent real units were merely employing extreme, unprecedented levels of camouflage and radio silence, or overanalyze minor errors, spending days searching for small, telltale errors in the synthetic data, such as a slight imperfection in a radio operator's fist, or a non-standard vehicle type in an aerial photo. These minor, often insignificant, errors were blown up into major analytical projects, wasting critical time and ensuring they missed the actual, quiet movements of the real Allied forces. The Germans were trapped by their own failure of imagination. The solution, that the visual evidence was rubber, the acoustic evidence was a record, and the electromagnetic evidence was an imitation, was simply too absurd for them to place on the strategic planning table. They continued to search for a hard, material explanation for what was, in fact, an ingenious theatrical performance. This intellectual rigidity blinded them to the simplicity of the truth, leading to a disastrous analysis paralysis, the inability to make a decisive decision because the data, though overwhelmingly abundant, could not be trusted. This paralysis often led the German high command to delay decisions, ensuring that when they finally committed their reserves, they were either too late or committed to the wrong battle entirely, precisely as the Ghost Army intended. The acoustic deception was, arguably, the most technically sophisticated, least understood, and most devastatingly effective component of the Ghost Army's arsenal. German intelligence had trained generations of personnel at their Funkhorststellen listening posts to distinguish the precise acoustic signature of an enemy division. This was a science built on physics and predictability. The heavy, low-frequency rumble of a tank, the distinct whine of a half-track, the clamor of 30,000 men setting up camp. The Ghost Army turned this precise science into a source of strategic paranoia, forcing the enemy to shoot at sound waves. The sonic component was the responsibility of the unit's signal company, staffed by former radio engineers and sound mixers from Bell Laboratories and the radio industry. The core equipment was custom-built by Bell Labs, featuring specialized, powerful amplifiers and 300-pound speaker systems mounted on M4 half-tracks. These were not mere loudspeakers. They were powerful, military-grade sound projectors designed to overcome wind, terrain absorption, and ambient noise. The sound engineers understood that low-frequency sound bass carried much farther and was less susceptible to acoustic shadowing, absorption by hills, trees, and buildings, than the higher frequencies of human voices and metallic clatter. They meticulously filtered and amplified the authentic low-frequency rumbles of heavy vehicles, ensuring the acoustic illusion had mass and distance when it hit the German listening posts 10–15 miles distant. The consistent projection of this low-frequency sound convinced German analysts that the sound source was a massive, distant concentration of real armor, reinforcing the belief that the target unit was large and moving, even when the source was a single truck playing a record. The sound tracks were not random noise. They were an auditory narrative carefully constructed by former Hollywood sound mixers. They created specific timed 8-minute sound loops for every phase of a division's fictional activity, forming an acoustic narrative that mimicked genuine military rhythm. Phase I, the advance, would start with the continuous, grinding roar of armor in motion. Phase II, deployment, would abruptly stop the continuous noise, replacing it with the metallic clang of tank loading ramps and the shouts of command, signifying the force was moving into a final staging area. And Phase III, readiness, would transition into a low-frequency hum of power generators and idling truck engines, indicating a fully deployed motor pool waiting for final orders. The seamless transition between these phases created a compelling, verified narrative of arrival, deployment, and readiness. German analysts reported these acoustic movements as facts, unaware they were listening to a perfectly engineered audio drama. Crucially, the sound units were ruthlessly tactical, often playing the most compelling sound loops, such as the continuous hammering and rigging of pontoon bridge construction near a fainted river crossing point. This forced German intelligence to commit valuable, finite artillery reconnaissance and fire to destroy a perceived bridgehead that existed only as a powerful audio recording, wasting massive amounts of German ordnance on pure deception. The psychological toll on the German listening post personnel, forced to listen to a phantom army move relentlessly toward them through the cold night, was immense. The cost of this sonic warfare alone, measured in the thousands of shells and gallons of fuel wasted by the Germans, was estimated to be in the tens of millions of dollars, the price the enemy paid for listening to a lie. The human deception was the final, devastating piece of the Ghost Army's integrated lie, directly targeting the German reliance on human and morale intelligence gathered through local spies and collaborators. This was the art of the human cell, where the unit's soldiers became masters of selling the lie through convincing social performance, ensuring the official lie was supported by seemingly irrefutable human reality. The soldiers of the 23rd were essentially method actors trained in military discipline. They were required to embody the persona of the real unit they were impersonating, right down to the most minor details, ensuring the persona was consistent with the unit's known morale and operational history. If impersonating an elite, veteran armored unit, they would act cocky, loud, and display an air of competence. If impersonating a raw, recently deployed division, the soldiers would act overly cautious and slightly inexperienced, making the deception instantly believable to a local observer. When granted brief liberty in towns near the front, The soldiers were under strict orders to socialize, frequent local bars, and deliberately drop specific, false rumors. They were told to act like tired, slightly careless American GIs, drinking a bit too much, complaining about their commanding officer, and grumbling loudly about the difficulty of the imaginary march they were preparing for. This touch of human, morale-based complaint was considered the most valuable form of human intelligence by the Germans. The most advanced tactic was the intentional capture, an escape. A ghost army officer, dressed in the exact uniform of the unit they were impersonating, would deliberately allow himself to be captured by Allied forces who were in on the ruse. The captured officer would then be subject to a theatrical interrogation by Allied personnel within earshot of German agents or collaborators. The confession would reveal false operational plans and troop numbers before the officer made a clumsy, prearranged escape. This seemingly high-value, high-risk human intelligence, a confession under duress, was prioritized instantly by German analysts, leading them to commit entire divisions based on a fabricated wartime play. This entire theatrical performance was not random, it was highly targeted. The intelligence planted by the 23rd's actors would move from the local collaborator to the German WWII agent, and finally into the OKW intelligence files as confirmed human source intelligence. This gave the Ghost Army's overall deception a veneer of reality that no other form of intelligence could counter. The German generals were defeated by the simple, humiliating fact that their most trusted human intelligence source was an actor on a stage designed by his commanding officers. The Ghost Army's deployment and subsequent disappearance were textbook examples of logistical paradox, achieving the strategic effect of massive movement without any of the attendant logistical costs. Their key tactical advantage was the impossible speed with which they could reposition, a feat that defied all established German logistics calculations for a heavy armored force. This mobility was the final insult to the German High Command's belief in quantifiable material movement. The entire 1,100-man unit, capable of simulating 30,000 troops, arrived in approximately 200 light vehicles. The deployment of the visual decoys was a streamlined, almost instant process. Within an hour of arrival, a field could be transformed into a convincing staging area. Rubber tanks and artillery were rapidly inflated using gas-powered air compressors, then anchored to the ground with military precision. Crucially, jeeps and light trucks attached with large, heavy steel rollers, track rollers, would drive wide, circular patterns around the decoys, pressing deep, convincing tank tracks into the soft ground, creating the visual evidence of heavy vehicles moving in and out of the park. The true psychological shock came at the moment of withdrawal. A real armored division would take days to pull out of a staging area, a process involving thousands of truck movements, massive radio traffic, and clear visual signatures. The Ghost Army could vanish in a single night. The rubber tanks were simply deflated, a 5-minute process, rolled up and loaded onto light trucks. The entire division could pack up and move 50 to 100 miles away under the cover of darkness, completely destroying the enemy's timetable. When German aerial reconnaissance flew over the next morning, they found only an empty field with fresh tank tracks and the remnants of a fire pit. Their intelligence conclusion was immediate and strategically fatal. The division had just embarked on a massive, overnight advance, forcing the Germans to shift their limited reserves to counter an attack that was already over 100 miles away. The Ghost Army was a master of strategic prepositioning and instant teleportation, a feat impossible with steel but routine with rubber, proving the power of illusion over material reality. The cumulative effect of the Ghost Army's operations was not merely tactical. It was a profound psychological and strategic attack on the German High Command's core operational philosophy. The systematic contradiction of their core intelligence principles introduced a paralyzing element of radical uncertainty across the entire Western Front. German military planning depended on an ironclad faith in material intelligence. The Ghost Army corrupted this faith. Generals were constantly faced with irrefutable data that led to contradictory conclusions, creating a state of analysis paralysis. The inability to make a decisive decision because the data, though overwhelmingly abundant, could not be trusted. The German mind, trained for efficiency, could not process the notion of a military unit designed for wastefulness and misdirection, leading them to strategic inaction. The strategic dilemma was existential. Should they commit their last, irreplaceable panzer division to defend a sector where intelligence confirmed the presence of a threatening U.S. armored division, visual, oral, radio, or should they ignore the intelligence and commit the reserve to a sector where the physical evidence was minimal but the strategic threat was higher? Every option was a gamble, and the stakes were existential, ensuring the Ghost Army was successful regardless of the German choice. The strategic payoff for the Allies was measured in misallocated German resources. Every time a panzer division, desperately needed to repel a genuine attack, was repositioned to counter the phantom threat at Viersen or Bedemberg, the Ghost Army achieved a massive, cost-effective victory. The Germans continuously searched for a hard, conventional strategic explanation for what was simply a high-level theatrical performance. This intellectual rigidity blinded them to the simplicity of the truth, leading to a disastrous analysis paralysis that guaranteed their resources were either too late or committed to the wrong battle entirely, precisely as the Ghost Army intended. Operation Viersen in March 1945, the Ghost Army's masterpiece, was a large-scale, 10-day symphony of deception designed to cover the real, surprise crossing of the Rhine by General Patton's Third Army. This operation was the ultimate test of the TAD doctrine, executed on a major strategic scale, and it proved the final, decisive nail in the coffin of German intelligence confidence on the Western Front. The Ghost Army seamlessly moved into position north of the real crossing point. Rubber decoys, Shermans, long toms, were deployed in highly visible, organized patterns, strategically placed to be spotted by German reconnaissance aircraft. Spoof radio traffic began a massive, sustained surge, with operators demanding fuel and pontoon bridge components, creating the electromagnetic illusion of a vast logistical buildup and impending attack. This radio chatter was so convincing, it immediately overloaded the German signals intelligence network. The sonic units deployed to the riverbank and broadcast the sounds of pontoon bridge construction and heavy armor marshalling 24 hours a day, peaking during the night. German listening posts immediately reported massive Allied engineer activity, forcing German artillery command to fire on the phantom crossing point and commit valuable ordnance to destroying a bridge that existed only as a powerful audio recording. Crucially, soldiers of the 23rd, wearing the insignia of the real divisions, 30th and 79th Infantry, 8th Armored, entered nearby towns and began the personnel deception. They loudly complained about the lack of specific, esoteric supply items needed for a river crossing at that precise location, and spread rumors of the attack timetable. This human intelligence confirmed the manufactured visual and acoustic data, leading German high command to believe the threat was certain, validating the lie across all 4 intelligence channels. The German response was immediate and tragically predictable. Field Marshal Walter Model diverted 2 irreplaceable panzer divisions and several artillery regiments to the Viersen sector. He poured precious, scarce resources into repelling a phantom army, ensuring that when General Patton launched his actual, unhindered crossing at Oppenheim, the German opposition was virtually non-existent. The Ghost Army sustained the illusion for 36 critical hours past the point where a real division would have moved, and then, in the final act, vanished into the night, leaving the German high command staring at an empty field. The key to the Ghost Army's success was its human composition, a concentration of civilian creative talent that the rigid German military machine could never have assembled or even conceived of weaponizing. The unit was a declaration that creativity was a decisive military asset, and the German military was defeated by the ingenuity of America's unconventional workforce. The unit's roster was filled with the architects, the masters of scale, and the painters and sculptors, the masters of authenticity. Architects were essential for visual realism, using their knowledge of perspective, scale, and sightlines to ensure that a few dozen rubber tanks, correctly spaced and positioned, implied a much larger force extending deep into the surrounding tree lines. Artists like Ellsworth Kelly and Bill Blass ensured the visual lie was perfect, using paint and dust to create the perfect illusion of worn, dirty, and battle-ready equipment, ensuring the decoys looked like the equipment of a veteran division, not new props. The unit also featured the actors and writers, the masters of persona, who were its core human deception tool. They created believable military personas, improvising conversations and rumors that were compelling and authentic. They mastered the nuances of American military jargon and demeanor, ensuring their interactions with locals and spies were instantly credible, selling the strategic lie through convincing social performance. The German military, which suppressed modern art and intellectual freedom, could not comprehend the strategic value of such a unit. Their system prized obedience and technical specialization. The American system, drawing on its vast, dynamic civilian workforce, prized adaptability and creative problem-solving. The Ghost Army was the ultimate expression of this cultural difference. The freedom to think creatively was weaponized and used to defeat the rigid predictability of the totalitarian state. The entire unit proved that a well-placed rumor, a well-painted shadow, and a convincing sound effect could be more strategically potent than a battery of real artillery. The economic impact of the Ghost Army, measured in the resources they forced the Germans to expend, was astronomical. This was a direct, self-defeating war of attrition against air, where the Germans paid a real material price for every phantom they chased, severely crippling their ability to defend against the genuine Allied thrusts. The financial bleed was most evident in fuel consumption. Every time the Ghost Army drew out a genuine German armored division for a countermove, that division consumed tens of thousands of gallons of gasoline. Considering the Allied bombing of German synthetic fuel plants, every single gallon of fuel wasted chasing a rubber tank near Viersen was a gallon that could not be used to power a Tiger tank or a Me-262 jet fighter on a genuine mission. The Ghost Army was, in effect, a black hole for German petroleum reserves, forcing the enemy to spend their most critical resource on a ghost. The strategic cost was also apparent in the loss of ordnance and aircraft. German artillery units, forced to fire on phantom river crossings or tank parks confirmed by acoustic intelligence, fired thousands of shells at empty fields. This ammunition, costing valuable steel and manpower to produce and transport, was gone forever, ensuring those batteries were critically low on shells when the real attack came. Similarly, German reconnaissance planes and fighter bombers were diverted from vital rail interdiction and genuine observation missions to confirm the movement of the Phantom Army. This wasted the limited operational hours of Germany's few remaining aircraft and exposed their pilots to unnecessary risks. The Ghost Army achieved an almost perfect military economy. They inflicted massive material damage on the enemy, measured in fuel, shells, and airframes, at a near-zero cost to the Allied war machine. They forced the Germans into a costly, strategic misinvestment that ultimately crippled their ability to respond to the real threats. The German generals were defeated by the simple fact that their enemy could afford to build an illusion and force them to pay the real price for fighting it. The Ghost Army represented the ultimate strategic paradox for German military thinking. a challenge to the very nature of operational maneuver that would have confounded Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself. The unit embodied the logistical nightmare that defeated the German army. The enemy could not be located, measured, or predicted, thus destroying the foundation of Rommel's philosophy of fast-moving, decisive counterattack. The German generals were forced to grapple with the existence of two distinct American armies: the massive, visible Army Patton's force, the overwhelming force of steel and manpower, moving predictably, though rapidly, and leaving clear physical signatures, and the phantom, mobile army, the Ghost Army, a force of pure illusion, capable of instant relocation and creating the acoustic and visual signature of 30,000 men with only 1,100. The Ghost Army successfully weaponized invisibility, forcing the Wehrmacht to commit forces against every perceived threat, real or fake. The dilemma was fatal. Should the last remaining armored reserves be committed to fighting the visible army, or should they be held back to defend against a flank attack by the Phantom Army, whose presence was confirmed by 3 layers of intelligence but whose location was highly unstable? The Ghost Army successfully weaponized invisibility, ensuring that any German decision was a strategic gamble. The strategic revelation was complete. The American army had not only mastered massive movement, the real divisions, but also massive concealment, the phantom divisions. The systematic deployment of illusion introduced a level of chaos that the rigidly centralized German command structure could not handle. The generals were defeated by a phantom force that mastered the concept of instant logistical repositioning, a feat impossible with steel but routine with air and rubber. The failure to adapt to this new, theatrical form of warfare was a defining moment in the collapse of the German defense. The most extraordinary chapter of the Ghost Army's story is the decades of enforced silence that followed the war. The unit's existence and every detail of its operation were immediately classified as top secret upon its final disbandment. The secrecy was maintained for over 50 years, finally lifted in 1996, protecting not only the technique, but also the reputation of the defeated enemy. The primary reason for the prolonged secrecy was twofold. First, preserving the technique, as Allied planners believed that the TAD doctrine, the integrated multi-channel deception, was a critical capability that needed to be protected for future conflicts against the Soviet Union or other major powers. The methods of acoustic and radio spoofing, in particular, were considered too valuable to reveal to the world. Second, the secrecy was necessary for shielding the intelligence failure. To officially reveal that the German High Command, the inheritors of the world's most disciplined military tradition, were systematically fooled by rubber balloons, movie props, and sound effects for nearly a year would have been a global embarrassment and would have completely compromised the technique for future covert operations. Maintaining the secrecy protected the reputation of the German General Staff and, ironically, the integrity of Allied military intelligence, which would have had to admit the shocking simplicity of its own deception. The soldiers of the 23rd, the actors, artists, and engineers, simply returned to civilian life, forbidden from speaking about the most incredible experience of their lives. They had participated in every major Allied operation from Normandy to the Rhine crossing, achieved one of the highest efficiency-to-casualty ratios of the war, and saved thousands of lives, yet they could not claim a single medal or recognition. Their heroics consisted of painting shadows, playing sound effects, and masterfully lying to generals. The only history of the Ghost Army existed in sealed archives and the bewildered, fragmented testimony of German veterans who reported being ordered to repel an attack that simply vanished. The story was lost to history, a silent, powerful testament to the efficacy of the illusion. The effectiveness of the Ghost Army, only quantifiable decades after the war, is staggering when measured against their size and mission. They achieved one of the most cost-effective victories of the entire conflict, proving that strategic advantage is measured in ingenuity, not just steel. The ultimate achievement of the Ghost Army can be measured in casualty avoidance. Military historians estimate that the Ghost Army operations were instrumental in saving between 15,000 and 30,000 Allied soldiers' lives by diverting German counterattacks and artillery fire away from genuine troop concentrations and operations. The deception was a massive shield of illusion that protected the advancing Allied forces. The unit's operational discipline was flawless. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were deployed in 21 major battlefield deceptions across the European theater, with every single operation successfully convincing the German High Command that the Phantom Force was real. They were perhaps the most consistently effective combat unit of the entire war, never failing to achieve their objective of strategic misdirection. The unit suffered a remarkably low casualty rate of only 3 men killed during their deployment. This minimal cost, coupled with the massive strategic return in saved lives and misallocated German resources, makes the Ghost Army a unique case study in military efficiency. They achieved an almost perfect military economy. They destroyed enemy resources, saved massive numbers of their own troops, and contributed to every major Allied breakthrough without ever engaging in a full-scale battle. The Ghost Army won the war not by killing men, but by fooling generals. The true impact of the Ghost Army was not just on the outcome of World War II, but on the future of military strategy. Once the reports of the 23rd were declassified and analyzed, their unique methods fundamentally altered the development of post-war US and NATO covert operations and tactical deception doctrine. The success of the artists, designers, and engineers established the core principle that non-traditional civilian expertise was essential for modern deception. This led to the integration of civilian skills. As future intelligence and special operations, units actively recruited personnel for their skills in art, theater, and advanced communications, formally recognizing that creativity was a critical military asset that needed to be integrated into conventional forces. The Ghost Army proved that deception must operate across multiple intelligence channels simultaneously: visual, acoustic, radio, and human. This gave rise to the multi-spectrum deception, the TAD model, which NATO forces adopted as standard operational procedure, understanding that a single trick, no matter how clever, is insufficient against a determined enemy. Finally, the concept of the rubber tank evolved into sophisticated, modern thermal and radar decoys, such as the tactical deception system, used to protect high-value assets and mask troop movements in every conflict since World War II. The Ghost Army taught the world that illusion is a permanent, cost-effective weapon, proving the enduring strategic value of the simple rubber prop. The German generals, rooted in the predictable physics of World War I-era logistics, were defeated by the unpredictable, creative minds of the American civilian world. The Ghost Army was the ultimate proof that the arsenal of democracy was not just a symbol of production might, but a recognition that intellectual freedom and ingenuity were, ultimately, the most decisive weapons of the entire war. The ultimate confirmation of the Ghost Army's effectiveness came from the post-war testimony and memoirs of the defeated German generals. Their accounts consistently identified the pervasive feeling of strategic uncertainty as a decisive factor in their collapse, often citing the baffling movement of American forces. This psychological breakdown proved the effectiveness of the Ghost Army's campaign against the enemy mind. Generals such as Hasso von Manteuffel and Walter Model, who committed suicide after being captured, acknowledged that their defensive plans were constantly undermined by an inability to accurately place Allied reserves. They spoke of the unprecedented speed with which American divisions seemed to reposition, a speed that violated all known military logistics doctrines. They never explicitly mentioned rubber tanks, as the deception remained classified, but their confusion over logistics proved the illusion was flawless. The systematic movement of phantom armies across the front line was a source of constant frustration and bewilderment. The intelligence officers, who had been the most trusted members of the German staff, saw their meticulous work rendered meaningless. Their faith in their own advanced reconnaissance and SIGINT capabilities was utterly betrayed by a handful of American sound mixers and artists. The deep, lasting psychological impact was the realization that their enemy was not just stronger, but smarter and more unpredictable. Their rigid analytical structure could not comprehend a foe that introduced such chaotic strategic fluidity, leading to a profound sense of humiliation and defeat long before the final surrender. The German staff officers reviewing intelligence logs in captivity noted the constant, contradictory reports. One day a division was confirmed near Aachen. The next day, it was confirmed 100 miles south, and yet the intelligence reports maintained both units' signatures were genuine. They were forced to conclude that American logistics had achieved a level of instantaneous repositioning that transcended their own understanding of mechanical warfare. The final lesson learned by the defeated generals was that their enemy was not fighting a conventional war of position, but a strategic war of illusion. The story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army, is the most profound testament to the power of imagination and ingenuity in modern warfare. It proves that dominance is not solely a function of material superiority, but of strategic flexibility and the ability to dictate the enemy's perception of reality. The Ghost Army won the battle for the German mind, ensuring the physical battle was a foregone conclusion. The Ghost Army broke every established rule of conflict to establish a new, permanent doctrine. Perception is reality, meaning the outcome of a battle can be determined not by the actual troop strength, but by what the enemy believes the troop strength to be. And creativity is a force multiplier, proving that non-traditional civilian skills, art, theater, and sound engineering, can be weaponized to create a strategic advantage that conventional military power cannot match. The success of the Phantom Army remains a defining case study in military history. The ultimate lesson of the Ghost Army is that the enemy's certainty is a vulnerability. The more an enemy trusts their intelligence, the more vulnerable they are to a multi-layered, integrated lie. The arsenal of democracy was not just a manufacturing complex. It was an intellectual and creative powerhouse that understood how to fight a war on two fronts: the physical battle for territory and the psychological battle for the enemy's mind. The Ghost Army won the latter decisively. They defeated the meticulous German war machine with rubber tanks and sound effects, ensuring that the German generals spent their last, precious resources fighting a battle against a shadow. The legacy of the Ghost Army is that illusion is cheaper than reality, and the most powerful weapon an army can possess is the ability to control the enemy's perception. The Ghost Army won the war not by killing men, but by masterfully lying to generals.